What's going on, new mice? I want to bring you guys an overview of Deepbook and Deep Token on SUI. It's an infrastructure play, and in this video, I'm going to be doing my best to make it as simple as possible to understand what this protocol is doing, what a central limit order book is, how it relates to DeFi, and how it can actually benefit the entire ecosystem. Of course, guys, none of this is financial advice. Please always do your own research. I'm just some dude in a hammock giving you their 2 cents on the market, letting you know what they found out about this token. So let's go ahead and get straight into it. All right, let's do it. If you guys have any interest in checking out the blogs from the SUI Foundation themselves, you can always check them out. Here's blogs.sui.io. If you don't want to check them out, then you clicked on the right video. I'm going to give you guys a summary, essentially, of what Deepbook is. And it is a CLOB, or central limit order book. More specifically, Deepbook is a decentralized central limit order book. And what does that mean at a very fundamental sense? What this means is that Deepbook is playing matchmaker between people who want to buy something and between people who want to sell something. For anybody that doesn't know how DeFi works currently, there's typically things called AMMs, or automated market makers, which have been implemented in DeFi because it eliminates the need for a centralized exchange or for a central limit order book like this. However, there are some advantages and disadvantages to using automated market makers versus centralized limit order books. So here's what ChatGPT lists as some of the advantages and disadvantages of the central limit order book versus the automated market maker. I think the fundamental difference that affects everything down the line here is really just understanding that the central limit order book requires a buyer and a seller at a certain price for whatever it is that you're trying to buy and sell, whereas an AMM allows for just one buyer or just one seller to be present in order to make that trade occur. An AMM, by definition, then also needs to have a liquidity pool and liquidity providers, whereas a central limit order book doesn't necessarily have to have liquidity pool, although it will definitely help to make the order books a little bit more efficient. Some other things that I think are important to highlight here, because they might not be necessarily as intuitive, is that the limit order books are going to allow for true price discovery with market forces, whereas AMMs are a lot easier to manipulate, as anybody that's been in any meme coin pretty much knows. You can oftentimes manipulate, or founders can oftentimes manipulate the price of the token based on this formula here and the amount of liquidity to buys, etc., that they put on the chart. Some other things that I think are important to highlight here is that the limit order books are going to allow for more capital efficiency, because you know exactly how many people are trying to make a buy or a sell at a certain price, whereas the automated market maker is going to have more of a spread, and that's going to lead to slippage whenever you're trying to purchase, especially larger volumes. I think something that's important to highlight here is that although AMMs are a little bit worse for low liquidity markets, if there isn't a lot of actual liquidity in liquidity pools, they're not very efficient. However, they are better, or typically more efficient, if there is lower volume on a trade. Let's say a meme coin, for example, doesn't have a ton of people buying and selling. There might not be a lot of people buying and selling at certain market prices. Therefore, they might not be able to buy or sell the token at all if there's only a limit order book. Whereas an AMM, you only need to have either a buyer or a seller, and it's okay if there isn't necessarily a perfect one-to-one match either on the buy or the sale end. A couple more things by nature: because AMMs have liquidity pools, you can experience impermanent loss. There's slippage that occurs, which I already talked about. However, you can also make money by being a liquidity pool provider, which I don't think that you can do as much over here on the limit order book side. And then these last few points down here, I'd say, are mostly debatable, except for the composability. For CLOBs, it tends to be more difficult. That's why you don't see as many limit order books in DeFi right now, whereas the AMMs are very easy to plug and play into different protocols. And then liquidity provision definitely requires more management here, as there requires a constant need for different people buying and selling or placing orders at certain prices, whereas for the AMMs, you don't have to have people doing anything. It's just all automated process. And then here, I think that this is really just case dependent in terms of gas costs. It really just depends on the chain and what you're doing, volumes, all that stuff. For gas costs, bot usage, anybody that's been on Solana nodes, you can have bots on AMMs or using AMMs. And then latency, again, it really just depends on what chain you're using. Before we talk about how all this relates to the tokenomics of Deep and really get into it, I just want to ask, if you guys have gotten any value from this video so far, please give give it a like, drop a comment down below. I'm going to respond to all the comments. By far and above, all my sweet content performs the worst on my channel. So if you guys could please like this, help promote it in the algorithm, I'd really appreciate it. Let's go ahead and get straight back to the video. A quick summary for what we just went over for Deepbook is that it is a decentralized central limit order book. So what that means, decentralized because it's using smart contracts. It's on the SUI blockchain to actually execute a lot of its functions. There's no one person that's actually controlling or executing the functions. However, it is a central limit order book because it is one centralized location, one centralized place that people can place limit orders, or they can place buys and sells at certain prices for certain assets that they want to trade. The Deepbook protocol then matches the buyers and sellers and automatically executes the trade using smart contract technology, whereas the AMM only requires either a buyer or a seller, and then they can go ahead and trade directly into a liquidity pool. Both of them have advantages and disadvantages. All right, let's keep this train rolling. Here we're going to take a look at Deep's utility as well as the tokenomics. Then we're going to wrap up this video. If you check the Deepbook website themselves, here's what they list as some of the advantages for actually staking the Deep token. However, I think ChatGPT does a little bit better of a job at being all-encompassing or just updating the actual information. I think that this is a little bit outdated. So I'm going to pull from this. I think that they have it pretty well laid out here. And you can see that ChatGPT states that one of the first advantages to staking Deep is that you actually get to participate in governance. What I actually appreciate about the Deep protocol as well is that they've thought a little bit ahead, and it's not just weighted linearly. So they actually have some scaling mechanisms in place. So even smaller fish have a pretty decent say, or a larger proportionate say relative to how much tokens they actually hold. So that's pretty cool. There are some governance options. It's pretty typical for Web3 projects as well. They also have some liquidity incentives to try and encourage people to provide more liquidity in the protocol. They also provide discounts both for the maker and the taker, or for the buyer and the seller on their platform. And they also have discounts, but they also give better rates to people who are staking as well as people who are making larger orders. So they're really trying to prioritize institutional adoption here. They also have a couple of mechanisms in place to try and get rid of wash trading. And they also make it very easy for the rest of the SUI ecosystem to integrate Deepbook into their protocols. So what we'll see a lot of protocols on SUI doing now is they'll take advantage of Deepbook, integrate Deepbook so that they can have some of the advantages of the limit order book flow in that system. And they'll also integrate AMMs, and then they'll pick between those two things depending on what the needs are of a trade at any given time. Now back to this screen, you can see that they list, you can use it for payments or trading fees, pool creation, liquidity, governance, all that good stuff. They didn't mention some of the other fee advantages that you have. Let's go ahead and get, though, into the tokenomics. I do like this part of their website. It does still stand, and it's very well laid out. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. This is the tokenomics, the token distribution. You can see that there's a max supply of 10 billion Deep, and at the time of the token generation event, there's about a quarter of it that was released into circulation. Here you can see the breakdown for where all the token allocations are going, with about 10% of the max supply getting airdropped to the community at the token generation event. About 28.5% is going to the core contributors and early backers, and about 61.5% of the total supply is going towards ecosystem growth. And then if you keep scrolling here, you can actually see the cliff itself for when all of the tokens are going to be unlocked. The TLDR is that after 7 years, 100% of the Deep tokens will actually be unlocked. And then to wrap up the video, we got to take a look, of course, at the actual price of the token itself, the history on the chart. How's Deep been performing, and how do we think it's going to keep performing? I want you guys to let me know in the comments down below your thoughts, what you think the all-time high could be for Deep, maybe this cycle, maybe cycles down the line, whatever you guys think. For now, though, you can see that it launched, at least on CoinGecko anyways, at the time of them recording, around 2 cents. It had an all-time high of around 30 cents, dipped all the way back down not too long ago to around 5 cents. Relatively recently, it shot up to around 18 cents, and then currently at the time of recording, it's sitting at about 16 cents and 170th place out of all the cryptos on CoinGecko, with a market cap of around $420 million, 1.6 billion fully diluted. That's everything from me today on Deepbook, Deep, CLOBs, AMMs, all that good stuff. If you guys found some value, if you guys appreciate this content, please let me know by leaving a like, drop a comment down below. I'm going to reply to all of them. As always, guys, it's been Joe from New Money Crypto. We all know there's smart money, dumb money, old money, and years from now, they'll call you new money. Until then, much love. Peace.